The song should not have existed. Ethan Caldwell froze with his hand still on the dining room door as a soft lullaby drifted through the mansion. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The melody was impossible. 6 years earlier, his wife, Emily, had sung that song to their newborn daughters in a hospital room just hours before she died. She had never recorded it. She had never written it down. No one knew the words except the two of them. Yet now, standing in the silent Connecticut mansion he rarely called home anymore, Ethan was hearing that same lullaby again. Slowly, he pushed the door open. What he saw made his heart stop. Ava, Lily, and Grace sat around the long, oak dining table. The triplets were 6 years old now. 3 little girls who had spent years trapped inside grief they couldn't explain. 3 little girls who barely smiled anymore. 3 little girls who had not sung a single song since losing their mother. But tonight they were singing. Every word, every note, perfectly. Across from them sat Naomi Brooks, the new maid Ethan had hired only 6 weeks earlier. Tears glistened in her eyes as she listened. She wasn't singing. She wasn't leading them. She looked just as shocked as Ethan felt. For several seconds nobody moved. The girls seemed completely unaware that their father had entered the room. They kept singing softly, almost as if they were singing to someone who wasn't there. Ethan felt a strange chill crawl across his skin. Something about the moment felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not frightening. Just impossible. Then the song ended. Silence filled the room again. Ava slowly lowered her head. Grace stared at the tabletop, and Lily looked directly toward an empty chair at the far end of the table. "Good night, Mommy," she whispered. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. Naomi turned and finally noticed him standing there. Her eyes widened. The girls followed her gaze. Instantly, the warmth vanished from their faces. The room became quiet again. The kind of quiet Ethan knew too well. The kind that had haunted this house since Emily's death. Later that evening, Ethan sat alone in his study staring out at the dark backyard. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling, windows stretched acres of perfectly maintained grounds. Everything looked flawless. Everything looked successful. Yet none of it mattered. Not the company. Not the money. Not the awards hanging on the wall. Because for the first time in years, something had happened that he could not explain. He replayed the scene over and over. The song. The girls. Naomi's tears. Lily's strange words. His daughters had spent years withdrawing deeper into themselves while he buried himself in work. Every specialist told him healing would take time. Every therapist said grief moved slowly. But no one had prepared him for this. The next morning, Ethan asked Naomi where the girls had learned the lullaby. The question drained the color from her face. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she quietly answered, "Sir, that's what I've been trying to figure out too." Before Ethan could ask another question, Naomi reached into her apron pocket and placed a folded piece of paper on his desk. It was a drawing made by one of the girls. At first it looked ordinary. Then Ethan noticed the room it depicted. His stomach tightened, because the drawing showed a room that had been locked and untouched for 6 years. A room no one was supposed to enter. So how had his daughters managed to draw every detail perfectly? For the rest of that day, Ethan could not focus on anything. Contracts sat untouched on his desk. Phone calls went unanswered. Even the constant stream of messages from Caldwell Holdings felt distant and unimportant. His mind kept returning to the drawing Naomi had placed in front of him. The room was unmistakable. The pale blue curtains. The rocking chair beside the window. The white bookshelf built into the wall. Every detail matched Emily's private room exactly as it had been 6 years earlier. Yet that room had remained locked since the week of her funeral. Ethan himself had ordered it. No staff member entered. No child had ever been allowed inside. At least that was what he believed. Belief, however, was becoming a dangerous thing. That evening, rain tapped softly against the mansion windows as Ethan walked through the long hallways. The house stretched across nearly 12,000 square feet, but it felt emptier than ever. He passed family portraits hanging on the walls. In every picture, Emily smiled. In every picture, he looked younger, lighter, less burdened. Before grief settled over the family like a permanent winter. Before 3 little girls learned how to hide their pain better than most adults. Downstairs, Naomi sat at the kitchen table reviewing school papers the triplets had brought home. She looked exhausted. Ethan noticed dark circles beneath her eyes. She had been carrying something heavy long before she arrived at the Caldwell estate. "Have they said anything else?" he asked quietly. Naomi hesitated. Then she nodded. Not directly. Ethan waited. But they keep asking strange questions. What kind of questions? Naomi looked down at the papers. Questions about memories. Questions about promises. Questions about whether people can forget someone they love. The words landed harder than Ethan expected. For a moment, he could not answer. Deep inside, a painful truth stirred. Maybe his daughters believed he had forgotten Emily. Maybe, in some ways, he had tried. Not because he stopped loving her. Because remembering hurt too much. Later that night, Martha, the longtime housekeeper, approached Ethan carrying a cardboard storage box she had discovered in a closet. Inside were old school projects, family photographs, and childhood keepsakes. Most appeared ordinary. Then Ethan found a stack of recent drawings. Dozens of them. Every drawing showed the same room. But now there was something new. A small wooden box sitting beside the rocking chair. Ethan stared at it. He had never seen that box before. Neither had Martha. The next morning, Naomi arrived early carrying something wrapped in a towel. Her expression immediately told Ethan this was not good news. Carefully, she unfolded the towel and revealed another drawing. This one had been found beneath Lily's mattress. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. The familiar room was there again. The rocking chair. The curtains. The bookshelf. But this time a message had been written beneath the picture in uneven 6-year-old handwriting. For simple words. She left something behind. Ethan stared at the sentence for a long time. Then he slowly looked up at Naomi. Neither of them spoke. Because they were both thinking the same thing. If Emily had truly left something behind inside that locked room, how did 3 little girls know about it when nobody else did? The question followed Ethan everywhere. During meetings. During meals. Even in the quiet moments before sleep. If Emily had truly left something behind, why had nobody ever found it? And why did the triplets seem to know more than the adults around them? 3 days later, another clue appeared. It happened on a gray Saturday morning while Naomi helped the girls organize old art supplies in the playroom. Most of the boxes contained crayons, coloring books, and unfinished crafts. Nothing unusual. Then Grace pulled a folded sheet of paper from the bottom of a storage bin and immediately tried to hide it behind her back. Naomi noticed the reaction. Not fear. Not guilt. More like protection. As if the paper was important. Gently, she asked if she could see it. Grace hesitated, then handed it over. Naomi felt her stomach tighten the moment she opened it. It was another drawing. But unlike the others, this one showed more than the locked room. Near the bookshelf stood the same wooden box. Beside it was a small gold key hanging from a ribbon. And beneath the drawing, written in a child's careful handwriting, were 5 words. Mommy said not yet. Naomi showed the picture to Ethan that evening. Neither of them understood what it meant. Yet something about those words lingered. Not yet. It sounded less like a memory and more like an instruction, as though someone had asked the girls to wait for the right moment. The mystery deepened the following week when Naomi noticed a strange pattern. Every afternoon after school, the triplets disappeared for exactly 20 minutes. They always returned together. They always seemed calmer afterward. And they never explained where they had gone. One afternoon, Naomi quietly followed them from a distance. The girls walked through the east wing of the mansion and stopped outside a narrow hallway few people used anymore. There, hanging on the wall, was an old family photograph taken shortly before Emily's death. The girls stood silently beneath it. Ava touched the frame. Lily whispered something Naomi could not hear. Then all 3 smiled. It was the first genuine smile Naomi had seen from Grace in months. The moment lasted only seconds. Then they walked away. Curious, Naomi approached the photograph. At first it looked ordinary. Then she noticed something strange. Tucked behind the corner of the frame was a small piece of paper. Someone had hidden it there. Her hands trembled as she carefully pulled it free. It was old, yellowed with age, folded several times. On the front, written in Emily's unmistakable handwriting, were 3 words. For my girls. Naomi stared at the note, her heart racing. She immediately brought it to Ethan. Together they unfolded the paper. Inside was not a letter. It was a map. A simple hand-drawn map of the mansion. And at the very center, circled in blue ink, was the one place neither of them expected to see. Emily's locked room. But there was one more detail that made Ethan's blood run cold. Next to the circle, Emily had written a date. A date that had not arrived yet. The date on the map sat quietly in Ethan's mind for days. He did not tell the girls about it. He did not mention it to anyone outside the house. Yet the closer that date seemed to come, the more unusual the atmosphere inside the mansion became. Something was changing. Not in the walls. Not in the old photographs. In the children themselves. Naomi noticed it first. Ava had always been the most guarded of the three sisters. If someone asked how she felt, she would usually shrug or change the subject. But one rainy afternoon, while Naomi helped the girls bake chocolate chip cookies in the kitchen, Ava suddenly asked a question that caught her completely off guard. Do people disappear if nobody talks about them anymore? Naomi stopped stirring the batter. The room fell quiet. Grace looked down. Lily stared at the floor. It was not the kind of question a 6-year-old usually asked. Naomi knelt beside Ava and gently asked what she meant. Ava twisted the sleeve of her sweater around her fingers. Sometimes I think Mommy is fading because Daddy never talks about her. The words broke something inside Naomi. Not because they were cruel, because they were honest. Children often see truths that adults spend years avoiding. That evening, Naomi sat alone on the back porch while the girls played nearby. For the first time since arriving at the estate, she found herself thinking about her own loss. About her younger sister. About the grief she had carried for years without ever speaking its name. Pain had a strange way of recognizing pain. Perhaps that was why the girls trusted her. She was not trying to fix them. She simply stayed. The next week brought another small breakthrough. During bedtime, Grace asked Naomi to tell a story. Not a fairy tale. Not a made-up adventure. She wanted a story about someone real. Naomi told them about her sister. About the laughter they shared. About the mistakes they made. About how love does not disappear when someone is gone. The room became completely silent. When she finished, Lily quietly climbed out of bed and hugged her. It was the first physical affection any of the girls had shown an adult in years. Naomi felt tears sting her eyes. Across the room, Ava and Grace moved closer too. No words. No explanations. Just 3 hurting little girls seeking comfort they had not known how to ask for. The next morning, Ethan noticed something different. The girls seemed lighter. They laughed at breakfast. They argued over pancakes. They even teased each other. Small moments. Ordinary moments. But in that house, they felt extraordinary. Yet beneath the growing warmth remained a shadow none of them understood. Later that afternoon, Lily approached Naomi carrying an old notebook. The cover was worn and faded. Inside were dozens of pages filled with childish handwriting. Most of it made little sense. Random thoughts. Tiny observations. Half-finished sentences. Then Naomi reached a page that made her freeze. Written across the center were 6 words. We promised not to tell. Beneath the sentence appeared 3 signatures. Ava, Lily, Grace. Naomi looked up. Tell what? She asked softly. Lily's smile disappeared. The little girl hugged the notebook tightly against her chest. Then she whispered a sentence that sent a chill through Naomi's entire body. The thing Mommy showed us before she left. And before Naomi could ask another question, Lily quietly walked away. Lily's words stayed with Naomi long after the conversation ended. The thing Mommy showed us before she left. It was not the statement itself that troubled her. It was the certainty in Lily's voice. Children sometimes imagine things. They misunderstood memories. But this felt different. The triplets spoke as though they were protecting something real. Something important. Over the next few days, Naomi stopped searching for answers directly. Instead, she simply spent time with the girls. They baked cookies, read books, walked through the gardens behind the mansion. Slowly, something remarkable began to happen. The girls started sharing pieces of themselves without being asked. One afternoon, while drawing pictures on the patio, Grace sketched a bright yellow sunrise. Naomi smiled and asked what it meant. Grace looked toward the sky and said, Mommy always said mornings are proof that hard things end. It was the longest sentence Grace had spoken in months. Nearby, Ethan happened to overhear it. He froze. Emily used to say those exact words. Not to the girls. To him. During difficult years when his company was struggling. During sleepless nights when they were building a future together. Hearing those words again felt like hearing her voice across time. For the first time, Ethan did not walk away from the pain. He sat down beside his daughters. The conversation was awkward at first. Years of distance could not disappear overnight. Yet something shifted. Ava showed him one of her drawings. Lily asked him about a family vacation he barely remembered. Grace laughed when he accidentally spilled lemonade on his shirt. Small moments. Ordinary moments. But inside the Caldwell mansion, they felt like miracles. Naomi watched from a distance and felt hope beginning to grow. The walls around the family were finally starting to crack. Then another discovery changed everything. A week before the mysterious date marked on Emily's map, Martha found an old storage trunk in the attic. It had belonged to Emily and had somehow been overlooked for years. Most of the contents were ordinary keepsakes: baby clothes, family photographs, holiday cards. Then Ethan discovered a sealed envelope hidden beneath a stack of notebooks. The envelope was addressed in Emily's handwriting. Not to him, not to the girls, to whoever finds this first. His pulse quickened as he carefully opened it. Inside was a single note. The message was short, almost frustratingly short. If you are reading this, then they remembered. Trust what they tell you, even if it sounds impossible. Ethan stared at the sentence for a long time. Naomi read it twice. Neither understood what it meant, yet both felt the same thing. Emily had expected this moment. Somehow, years before her death, she had known these clues would eventually be found. That night, Ethan could not sleep. Around midnight, he walked through the dark mansion and noticed a faint light beneath Ava's bedroom door. When he quietly peeked inside, he found all three girls awake, sitting together on the floor. In the center of their circle lay a piece of folded paper. The moment they saw him, Lily quickly covered it. Ava lowered her eyes. Grace looked frightened. Ethan gently asked what they were doing. Nobody answered. Then Ava whispered something that made his heart sink. We were trying to decide if it is finally time to tell you. Tell him what? The question hung over the mansion like a storm cloud. For the first time in years, Ethan felt closer to his daughters than ever before. Yet he also felt farther away from the truth. The girls clearly knew something. They were carrying a secret that connected them to Emily, a secret that had survived 6 years of silence. And now they were debating whether their father was finally ready to hear it. The following morning, Ethan made a decision he would not have considered only a few months earlier. He canceled a week of meetings, postponed an investor conference in New York, and remained home. Victor Hayes called 3 times to protest. Ethan ignored every call. For years he had convinced himself that providing for his family was enough. Now he wondered how many important moments he had missed while building an empire. The girls noticed the change immediately. At first they seemed cautious, almost suspicious. Then little by little they relaxed. They invited him to breakfast, asked him to join board games, even convinced him to help build a blanket fort in the library. Naomi watched the transformation with quiet gratitude. The girls were beginning to trust their father again. But healing rarely moves in a straight line. The closer Ethan became to his daughters, the more uncomfortable another person in the house appeared. Rebecca Sinclair had spent weeks observing the growing bond between Naomi and the children. At first she dismissed it as temporary. Now she seemed increasingly unsettled. One afternoon Naomi entered the kitchen and found Rebecca standing beside the counter examining several of the girls' drawings. Her expression was impossible to read. When Naomi asked if everything was all right, Rebecca smiled politely and changed the subject. Yet something about the interaction felt wrong. That evening, another strange event occurred. Ava approached Naomi carrying a folded note. Unlike the clues they had discovered before, this note appeared brand new. The paper was clean. The handwriting was recent. We found it in the hallway, Ava explained. Naomi unfolded it carefully. The message contained only a single sentence. Some doors stay closed for a reason. There was no signature, no explanation, just those words. Ethan immediately assumed it was a prank. Martha denied writing it. The girls looked genuinely confused. Naomi said nothing, but a deep sense of unease settled over her. The next day brought an even greater shock. The date marked on Emily's map was now only 48 hours away. The closer they came to it, the more nervous the girls became. Grace stopped sleeping well. Lily became unusually quiet. Even Ava seemed distracted. Finally, that evening, Naomi sat with them in the playroom and gently asked what frightened them. For a long moment nobody answered. Then Grace spoke. Mommy said something would happen on the date. Naomi felt her pulse quicken. What happens? Grace shook her head. She never told us. Before Naomi could ask another question, Ethan entered the room. The girls immediately fell silent. Not because they were afraid, because they had made a decision. Ava stood up and looked directly at her father. Her voice trembled slightly. Tomorrow we want to show you something. Ethan's heart raced. What is it? Ava glanced toward her sisters, then back at him. The place Mommy took us. The room became completely still. Because according to everything Ethan believed, that should have been impossible. The next morning arrived with a strange heaviness that nobody could explain. The date from Emily's map had finally come. From the moment the sun rose over the Caldwell estate, the triplets seemed unusually tense. They stayed close together. They whispered constantly. Every few minutes, one of them glanced toward the east wing of the mansion. Ethan noticed it. Naomi noticed it. Neither said anything. Around noon, Ava quietly approached her father. "It is time," she said. No explanation. No details. Just those 3 words. Ethan followed the girls through the house. Naomi walked behind them. Martha watched nervously from the hallway. The atmosphere felt less like a family gathering and more like people approaching something sacred. The girls led them toward a narrow staircase hidden behind an old section of the library. Ethan had lived in the mansion for nearly a decade and had never paid attention to it. The staircase ended at a small storage landing. There was nothing remarkable about the space except for one thing. Behind a stack of old boxes sat a wooden panel built into the wall. Ava pointed toward it. "Mommy showed us." Ethan's heart pounded. Naomi looked stunned. Slowly, he stepped forward and pushed against the panel. It moved. Behind it was a narrow compartment hidden inside the wall itself. For a brief second, hope flooded through the group. After months of clues, drawings, notes, and secrets, they had finally found something real, something tangible. But when Ethan reached inside, his expression changed instantly. The compartment was empty, completely empty. Silence filled the landing. Grace looked confused. Lily's eyes widened with panic. Ava stepped forward and checked the compartment herself as if she could not believe what she was seeing. "No," she whispered. "It was here." Ethan felt disappointment crash through him. The girls began talking over each other. Grace insisted they had remembered correctly. Lily started crying. Ava looked terrified. Naomi immediately knelt beside them, trying to calm them down. Then another voice broke the silence. Rebecca. She had followed them upstairs without anyone noticing. Her expression remained composed, but her words struck like ice. Maybe they imagined it. The girls froze. Rebecca continued carefully. "Children sometimes create stories when they miss someone." Ethan turned toward her. Naomi did too. The damage was immediate. The fragile confidence the girls had spent weeks building seemed to collapse in seconds. Lily wiped tears from her face. Grace lowered her head. Even Ava looked uncertain for the first time. Later that evening, the situation grew worse. Ethan found himself trapped between 2 painful possibilities. Either his daughters had truly discovered something important, or they had built an entire mystery around grief and memories. For the first time, doubt entered his mind. Naomi saw it immediately. That frightened her more than anything. Because children could survive unanswered questions. What they could not survive was feeling that nobody believed them. The tension finally erupted during dinner. Grace suddenly pushed away from the table and ran upstairs in tears. Lily followed moments later. Ava remained frozen in her chair. Ethan tried to speak, but she interrupted him. You were starting to think she was not telling the truth. Her voice shook. Ethan opened his mouth to respond. No words came. Ava stood and slowly backed away from the table. That is why Mommy was afraid. Then she walked out of the room. Ethan sat motionless. Naomi felt her stomach tighten. Because until that moment, nobody had ever suggested Emily had been afraid of anything. And if she truly had been afraid, the question suddenly became impossible to ignore. Afraid of what? Or afraid of who? That question refused to leave Ethan alone. For 2 days, he barely slept. Every memory he had of Emily seemed different now, as if a hidden layer had suddenly appeared beneath the life they shared. He remembered moments he had dismissed at the time, conversations she never finished, concerns she brushed aside, times when she seemed worried but insisted everything was fine. Back then, he had been building a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He convinced himself he was protecting his family by working harder. Now he wondered what he had failed to notice while chasing success. The breakthrough came from the last place anyone expected. Martha had spent the week organizing old boxes from a storage room in the basement. Most contained ordinary records, bills, manuals, insurance documents. Then she discovered a sealed folder tucked inside a forgotten filing cabinet. The folder belonged to Emily. Inside were dozens of handwritten pages. Journals, not daily entries, more like personal reflections. Ethan sat alone in his study reading them late into the night. The pages revealed a side of Emily he had not fully understood. She wrote about motherhood, about hope, about her fear that grief could isolate people who loved each other. She worried constantly about what would happen if the family stopped talking openly about pain. Yet one entry stood out above all the others. It had been written only weeks before the girls were born. Emily described preparing something special for the future, something intended for the children and Ethan, something she prayed they would discover together one day. But then the entry stopped abruptly. Several pages had been removed, torn cleanly from the journal. Ethan searched the folder again and again. The missing pages were gone, completely gone. The discovery rattled him. Someone had intentionally removed them. The next morning, he shared the journals with Naomi. As they reviewed the remaining entries, another detail emerged. Emily repeatedly mentioned trust. Not money, not inheritance. Trust. She seemed deeply concerned that the people she loved might someday stop trusting each other. Naomi felt a chill. The entire mystery suddenly looked different. Maybe the clues were never about finding an object. Maybe they were about protecting a truth. That same afternoon, another unexpected twist arrived. Lily approached Ethan carrying a photograph she had found inside one of Emily's books. The picture showed Emily standing in the garden months before the triplets were born. At first it appeared ordinary. Then Ethan noticed something in the background. Rebecca, years before they ever officially met. Years before she became part of his life. Rebecca stood near the edge of the photograph, speaking with Emily. Ethan stared at the image in disbelief. Rebecca had always claimed she met Emily only once at a charity event. Yet here was proof they knew each other much earlier. When Ethan calmly asked Rebecca about the photograph later that evening, she seemed genuinely startled. For the first time since he had known her, she struggled to answer a simple question. Her explanation sounded rushed, incomplete, defensive. After she left the room, Ethan looked at Naomi. Neither needed to say what they were thinking. Another piece of the puzzle had shifted into place. The missing journal pages, the empty compartment, the warnings, the photograph. Somehow they were connected. And as Ethan stared once more at Emily's handwriting, a painful realization finally settled over him. The biggest mistake he had made was not failing to solve the mystery sooner. It was failing to listen to the people trying to tell him the truth. But if Rebecca had been hiding part of the story all these years, what exactly was she afraid the family would discover? After the photograph surfaced, the atmosphere inside the Caldwell mansion changed completely. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone felt it. The mystery was no longer a collection of strange clues left behind by grief. It had become something real, something that connected the past to the present in ways nobody had expected. Ethan spent the next several days going through every box, every folder, and every forgotten corner of the estate. For the first time in years, he stopped running from Emily's memory. He stopped treating her absence like a locked door. Instead, he started listening, really listening, to his daughters, to Naomi, to the pieces of Emily that still remained. The breakthrough came from Ava. Late one afternoon, she approached Ethan carrying a worn envelope she had kept hidden inside a storybook. She admitted she had found it months earlier, but had been too afraid to show anyone. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered with handwritten notes. At first glance, it looked meaningless. Names, dates, small reminders. Then Ethan noticed something that made his chest tighten. Several of the notes referred to conversations Emily planned to have with the girls as they grew older. One line stood out above all the others. If I am not here, remind your father that love is not something you provide. It is something you give. Ethan read the sentence 3 times, then a fourth. For years he had measured his worth by what he built, earned, and protected. Emily had understood something he never did. The girls never needed a perfect provider. They needed their father. Across the room, Naomi quietly watched as the truth settled over him. The change was impossible to miss. The man who once filled every silence with work was finally beginning to face the consequences of his absence. Yet the mystery itself was still unfinished. That evening, Martha made another discovery. Hidden inside one of Emily's old notebooks was a folded receipt from a safety deposit box at a local bank. The date matched the same period when Emily had written many of her final notes. More importantly, the box had never been claimed. Ethan immediately contacted the bank. The following morning, he received confirmation that access was still available under family authorization. Suddenly, every clue seemed to point in the same direction. The hidden compartment, the missing journal pages, The notes, the map, the warnings. Emily had been preparing something. Not for herself. For the future. For this exact moment. As hope began to rise, another realization struck Ethan with equal force. Naomi had been right from the beginning. Every important breakthrough had happened because she chose compassion over skepticism. She believed the girls when nobody else fully could. She stayed patient when the answers made no sense. Without her, the family would never have reached this point. Later that night, Ethan sat with the triplets in the library. The girls seemed calmer than they had in years. For the first time, there was light in their eyes instead of confusion. Lily rested her head on his shoulder. Grace held his hand. Ava sat quietly beside him. Nobody spoke for several minutes. Then Ava finally broke the silence. Mommy said we would know when it was time. Ethan looked at her carefully. How? Ava smiled sadly. Because you would finally come looking. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. Not because of the mystery. Because he understood exactly what she meant. The clues had never been leading him toward a hidden object. They had been leading him back to his family. Yet one final piece remained missing. The next morning, Ethan, Naomi, and the girls prepared to visit the bank and open the safety deposit box Emily left behind. Whatever waited inside had the power to explain everything. And as they stood at the front door ready to leave, a phone call arrived that confirmed the truth they could no longer ignore. The missing journal pages had been removed years ago by someone who knew exactly what Emily had left behind. The drive to the bank felt strangely quiet. Not tense. Not fearful. More like the final moments before a storm finally breaks. Ethan sat beside his daughters while Naomi watched them from the front seat. For the first time in years, the girls were not shrinking away from difficult memories. They were moving toward them. When the safety deposit box was finally opened, the contents were surprisingly simple. There was no fortune, no secret inheritance, no dramatic legal document. Inside sat a bundle of letters tied together with a pale blue ribbon. One letter carried Ethan's name. 3 others were addressed to Ava, Lily, and Grace. Another was addressed to Naomi's successor, though Emily could never have known Naomi specifically. The final envelope contained copies of the missing journal pages. Ethan opened his first. By the second paragraph, tears blurred the words. Emily explained everything. She had known the risks surrounding the birth. She had spent months preparing letters, memories, and small treasures. For the people she loved. The hidden clues were never meant to create a mystery. They were meant to create a journey. She feared that grief would pull her family apart. She feared Ethan would bury himself in work. She feared the girls would grow up carrying pain in silence. So she created a path that could only be completed if they searched together. If they listened to each other. If they learned to trust each other again. The missing journal pages revealed another truth. Rebecca had discovered part of Emily's preparations years earlier. She had removed the pages because she believed the past would prevent Ethan from moving forward. It had been misguided and selfish, but not malicious. When confronted, Rebecca admitted everything. She apologized through tears and quietly left the relationship. Not because Ethan demanded it. Because she finally understood that the family needed healing more than he needed a future she had imagined for him. The letters to the girls contained memories, encouragement, and promises of love that would never disappear. Ava cried openly as she read hers. Grace smiled through tears. Lily held her letter against her chest as though she never wanted to let go. Then came the final letter. The one intended for whoever helped the family find their way back to each other. Naomi read it with trembling hands. Emily wrote about kindness. About the power of staying when others walk away. About how children often heal through love before they heal through understanding. By the time Naomi reached the end, there was not a dry eye in the room. Ethan stood and walked toward her. For a moment he could not speak. Then he simply said thank you. Not the polite thank you of an employer. The grateful thank you of a father whose family had been saved. Months later, the mansion no longer felt silent. Laughter echoed through the hallways again. Family dinners became a tradition. Ethan worked less and listened more. The girls talked about their mother without fear. They talked about their future without sadness. Naomi remained with the family, no longer seen as staff, but as someone who belonged. One evening, as the sun set across the Connecticut hills, Ethan sat on the back porch with Ava, Lily, and Grace beside him. The girls leaned against him while Naomi watched from nearby. For the first time in many years, the house felt alive. Ethan looked toward the sky and quietly whispered Emily's name. Not with grief, with gratitude, because he finally understood the lesson she had spent years trying to teach him. Money could build a mansion. It could buy comfort, security, and success. But it could never heal a broken family. Only presence could do that. Only kindness. Only love. And sometimes, all it takes to save a family is one person willing to stay long enough to help them find each other again.